Like to do just a request for bill introductions. And seeing none, we will move on to, your agenda says we were going to do recommendations for budgets previously heard, which we are going to get to. There are some things that we would like to clarify from yesterday, and so here in just a minute, Ms. Prosser is going to come up and do that. The other thing of why I would like to allow the School of the Blind to make their presentation and walk us through their budget, both by department and let them speak to it personally, is because I think, you know, they have a shared facility. And so some of the looking at facility upgrades, let's coordinate a little bit. So we can look at both of those, and we may do recommendations for both. At the end, we'll definitely do School of the Deaf, and if we have a good conversation around the other, we will look at that as well, which will give more time tomorrow for KSDE to kind of begin their walkthrough and an overview of their budget that we'll look at all of next week. Okay? So, Ms. Prosser, yes, if you would give us an update of what you heard from the building committee, and we might have a few other questions for you to clarify things from yesterday.
Absolutely, Chair. Hello, committee. Amanda Prosser, Legislative Research. I actually have several items to address from yesterday, including Joint Building Committee, so I'm just going to run through my list. So yesterday, I did have to walk out. I understand John Martello did provide some great testimony regarding the planned capital improvement expenditures at School for the Deaf. He emailed an additional response regarding the furnace installation, and I have emailed that to all of you, so you guys should have that in your possession. I know there was wanting some clarification around Joint Committee on State Building Construction, and I did collect that. So in December, John Martello did present his 5-year capital improvement plan to Joint Committee on State Building Construction. They gave their stamp of approval on that 5-year plan. That's a very futuristic look. He has not yet presented to that same committee for the current year, or for fiscal year 2026, to receive that stamp of approval. He will be doing that in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure what day they're scheduled. I need to look. So that's coming, but to say that Joint Committee on State Building Construction recommends the 2026 expenditures, that makes me a little uncomfortable, because that's not truly what happened. They gave the approval on the 5-year plans, but not for current year 26 yet. That being said, keep all of that in mind. Last year, when they did go before the committee and talk through their 5-year capital improvement plans, everything that you see in their capital improvement plans was on there, and so they've heard it. They've given the stamp of approval. But to say that the most current recommendation has budget year 26, and that the Joint Committee on State Building Construction has given their approval, I can't say that. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know that was kind of confusing. Okay. Seeing none, I'll continue. There was also some questions about what happened last year. Representative Estes brought up some good points, why there were some percent increases. So in front of you, we did go ahead and pass out. You should have a document titled 2024 Session Appropriations Report for School for the Deaf. It's the white one. This is a document that KLRD puts together at the end of session. We reconcile with Division of Budget, with what's in the appropriations bill and what Division of Budget has. It's also a digital document. I think on the bottom of yours, it has the link for where you can go find this. So this is going to encompass everything that's happened, and you can go back several years. This is just the years that we're interested in looking at. And what you can see so we'll have current year for what would have been current year 24 and then budget year 25 when we were doing last session. The document starts with the base budget at the top, and then it has agency adjustments, the governor's adjustments, and then what the legislative adjustments were. And then if you go on, there's all sorts of text narrative to explain that. So specific to School for the Deaf, which is what we talked about yesterday, you can see that for 25, the final outcome of the appropriations bill did include money for the IT position that was going to be shared with both schools. They finalized the statutorily required salary match for the teachers to be on par with the Olathe School District. And then they also had the legislature pay plan because both schools do have unlicensed personnel that does get incorporated since they are independent state agencies. So there are some pay plan pieces in that. And so, for example, if you have your School for the Deaf budget summary still, I don't know if you still have that, what you can see is, and I'm gonna point, this is kind of awkward, so on this appropriations report, that 17.7 million where my finger is, okay? On your School for the Deaf budget summary document, that number is going to be on page 2, right here where it says Senate, I can't read upside down, 2024 Senate Bill 28 and House Bill 2551. All funds, you're going to see that same number. So from the appropriations report to the budget summary, there's that 17.7 million. And so that should help. This is what covered last year. This is the current budget summary document.
Okay, so that brings me to a question that in appropriations, 2024 to 2025 reappropriations are getting looked at pretty heavy.
Right.
Do you have details on why this reappropriation, why it wasn't spent, what maybe it was going to be spent for, but they didn't get to it? Any explanation would be helpful.
Absolutely. So on page 2 for Kansas School for the Deaf, what he's referring to is row 1 on the budget analysis for 2025. And you do see there's an SGF reappropriation for about $156,000, and it was included in the Legislative Budget Committee recommendation. My understanding with, well, that money specifically, what that's from is they received ARPA dollars for their language assessment program. So they had ARPA dollars. They also had state general fund appropriation money that they were spending in that fund, in that account. They got federal dollars. What do? You spend the federal money first. Otherwise, it's going to go away. So they spent their federal monies, but they still had a little bit of state general fund left over, and so that reappropriated into the next year. The reason why it didn't get lapsed, my understanding, is that when Chairman Waymaster wanted to review all of the reappropriations across all state agencies, he was provided a list, and that list behind closed doors was discussed for what would be lapsed and what wouldn't, and this particular item was not lapsed. And so that's why it's still included in the Legislative Budget Committee recommendation.
Okay, that's very helpful. We've just been having conversations of how to know what was going on there. I really appreciate the details on that.
The last item, I think, with deaf that I wanted to recognize, there was a lot of interest in having the governor's proposal written down. KLRD's been working on that. We received that information last Thursday, and so we've been having to go through all the agencies and figure out the differences. And it's clear now we are given the go-ahead to release kind of those documents. And so on a yellow piece of paper, you'll always see it on yellow, whether it's in House Appropriations or in this committee. It's titled Governor's Differences from the Legislative Budget Committee Recommendation. And so you should only have School for the Deaf right now because I didn't want to confuse by passing out too much. And so you'll see the 4 items that were included in the governor's proposal, okay, that are not included in the LBC recommendation. And so as described, the governor's proposal did include money for the utility tunnel repairs, the roof replacement at the Taylor Gym, the gas service line, and then abating the hazardous material. And so the yellow piece of paper, if you see it here, HAP, that is what the governor's proposal had in it that the Special Committee on Legislative Budget did not include in their House Bill 2007. And with that, I'm finished addressing questions for School for the Deaf, if there's anything else.
Any other questions? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on that, noticing everything that the school had requested was coming out of the SIBF. Do we know the balance on that if we were to go ahead with the items 2 through 5 or the governor's recommendations, the 710?
Sure. Chair, yes, KLRD has a wonderful table that has all of that information, and I'm looking at the one I brought up, and it was last year's, so that's not very helpful. But we do have that information for the State Institutions Building Fund. We can provide the committee that'll have all of that.
But if the committee were to go ahead with this, we wouldn't threaten the ending balance of that fund at all. There would be a remaining balance.
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer that.
Can I step back for a second to that reappropriation? Do you know if that's just in their general fund? What happens with that reappropriation? If there's any details of accounting that I had a question come to me.
Sure. Chair, so for that specific reappropriation, that in the budget bill, they have a specific fund for that language assessment program, and they get SGF appropriations. That is the reappropriation that we're talking about. It is in that specific fund. It can only be used for the language assessment program. It's not in general operating for the school as a whole.
Representative Hill.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. So is that included, like when they're in their 26 budget request, do they delineate that out, or is that money that they can use in addition to what they've requested? I'm unclear on that.
Correct. So statutorily, in the budget bill, they are assigned, I think it's 300, I don't want to quote, an amount for the language assessment program. They can only use it for that. And in their 26 budget, it's the same way. They have a specific amount that they're using for that program, a specific SGF appropriation that they're looking for that program.
So without looking at the numbers right now, if that was $500,000 and they got this 100 and whatever it was, 151 reapportioned, does that mean that they have, if we went with their budget request, would that mean that they have $650,000 in that fund?
Yes.
Okay.
Ignoring the numbers that you said, but you have the idea conceptually correct.
Yeah. Okay. Just the principle.
So thank you, Nick. He helped. 399,000 is how much the appropriation is.
Oh, I'm 100,000 off.
Funny.
They'd probably take it, I bet. Thank you.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the, I guess I'm a little confused. When I look at the School of the Deaf and their contractual services, I mean, I read what those are for. Are they, but then I go and I look at KSDE's budget, and they have $110,000 for the deaf-blind program. So I'm just trying to, are they just?
Completely separate.
Okay.
Completely separate to where, could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Both State School for the Blind and State School for the Deaf are independent state agencies. They're not schools in the sense of Board of Education, KSDE schools. They do receive some oversight from the Board of Education, but they're not, budgetarily, they're not considered the same as your typical public school district.
So we have these schools that we're funding as a state, but then we have KSDE that's not utilizing their services?
KSD is definitely using their services. Well, let me rephrase that. Individual school districts and special ops and interlocals are using their services. And I'm sure that John Harding, who is the superintendent for School for the Blind, he can definitely reiterate, help you understand those relationships, if that's helpful.
I'm just trying to understand budgets when then they have it, when KSDE has it listed, but I'm not seeing correlation. So just trying to get a better understanding. So thank you very much.
Today, I think we have an administrator here. We had an excellent buildings and grounds person here yesterday to talk us through some details, and I think we'll get some more insight on some of the ins and outs of how they do cooperate with KSDE, but KSDE has some different funding for hearing impaired and eyesight impaired. So
Thank you.
Visually impaired, sorry. Oh, yeah. Mr. McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to follow up on Representative Hill, so hypothetically, we have $400,000 in their budget. They have 150 left over, reappropriate. So if we only approve 250 this year to get them up to 400,000, what would happen then the next year? Would they still put in their budget the 400,000 and assuming we would fund that way? What happens if we only fund 250 this year? What would that do in 27? If you follow my train of thought.
A little bit of my mindset as you think about it too is depending on what federal dollars they get, they could spend those first again and we'd be in a similar situation even though we pulled that out. We don't know what that is going to be. That would be a first thought in my mind.
So I would assume that 399 that Nick told us is out there would be the standard, I guess, or and how we fill that would be year by year. Would that make, I mean,
I think a good guidance that we do have is that I don't think this is going to be challenged as far as a reappropriation. If we want to take it up, that is our prerogative. But with how Legislative Budget Committee has actually given this a blessing and that there was a check on that. Some of them have been contended and this one was not. That for reasons we will hopefully learn in the future, this one's okay. And I would be okay letting that go and giving this money back to those assessment purposes. And if we're in the same situation next year, we can have this conversation again. But that's kind of where I'm landing on this. After I learned more, I definitely came in with some of the same questions.
okay, thank you.
All right, with that, I will allow you, if you're ready to, go over the school of the blind.
Absolutely. I didn't pass out things ahead of time just because I didn't want to get confused between those two schools, so thank you. Okay.
You have a question maybe for the revisor, or maybe for you. What authority does this committee have, and this is definitely a question, to shift that money, reappropriate their full budget amount and shift that money over to something else? Does this committee have that authority to make that decision? Might be probably a statutory question.
Well, that could, yeah, so that could come in the form of a recommendation from the committee when you're reporting out the budget. Now, I don't know if you're shifting that money to a budget that you're not considering in this committee. It might just be that, and it's a recommendation. Oh, within this budget?
Within this budget, but to just maybe make it general funds to where they can use it for what they need.
You'd have authority to make that motion and have that in your recommendation to the full appropriations committee, certainly.
Okay, thank you. Take that into consideration.
All right. So shifting gears, we're now looking at State School for the Blind. So again, this front table contains actuals for fiscal year 2024, along with the agency's revised request for fiscal year 25, and then their request for 2026. The agency column for fiscal year 2025 is that revised estimate for what was already approved for last session when the appropriations bill included a budget for 25. And to address Representative Estes' question that she posed for School for the Deaf, the percentage increase that you're seeing in that column at the bottom is because of what was approved last session. So if you look at the 2024 session appropriations report for School for the Blind, you can see that money was added both for the salary match with Olathe and the legislative pay plan. State general fund money was added for an IT consultant to work with both schools. State general fund money was added for their extended school year program, their summer program. And state general fund money was added to fund startup costs for their early childhood program. Additionally, you can see in that report, there was some SIBF money that was added for the capital improvements. And all of these additions are what contribute to that percent change that you're seeing on table 1, figure 1. If you flip to page 2, you're gonna see the analysis for the current year. Again, you look, that second box shows that the agency request is 14.2 million, including 8.4 million state general fund for 25. This amount is 1.7 million all funds, including 1.4 million state general fund above the agency's fiscal year 24 actuals. Again, the reason for this is what was added by the legislature in fiscal year 2025, and it is in the improved. Moving down the page to figure 4 with the revised request, the agency did submit a supplemental request, and that is detailed in item 2. So this is a new item. This is something different from what was approved, and they're asking for this in the current year. And so what that is, back 2 sessions ago, 2023 session, State School for the Blind received a $300,000 enhancement from this body to expand their summer school program in fiscal year 24, which is known as the on-the-road version of their extended school year. They wanted to expand that program. They did do this. They did serve students in Hutch and Wichita, and they also wanted to host a site in Dodge City. Unfortunately, they couldn't secure that site in the window of time between when the budget was approved, when they received the money, and when the program started. And because, unlike School for the Deaf, this particular item did not have reappropriation language underneath it. So when they couldn't secure that site, that money lapsed. They lost that money. And so what you're seeing here in item 2 in figure 4, that reappropriation request, they're asking for 2 things. One, they're asking for that funding. So they're asking for that $41,738 that lapsed. They're saying, hey, we do want that. We want to be able to spend it. We want to host a site. So they're asking for that money. And 2, they're asking for reappropriations language to be added to the bill. So when they have that extended school year program in the bill, they want reappropriations language right underneath that that says, hey, if we don't spend this, it will go to the next year so we can try and spend it next year. So for fiscal year 2025, those are the 2 requests that the agency has. LBC didn't grant any enhancement requests or supplemental requests, so those got taken out. Any questions for the current year before I move on to 26?
Committee questions? Mr. McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify here, the language for the 1,000-0400 extended school, what is that number meaning? Is that just a bill or is that?
I'm sorry, repeat your question.
So here in the bottom paragraph on page 2, it says reappropriation language for the 1,000-0400. What's that number?
So that's going to be the fund number that's in the bill. And I've been doing a good job of bringing House Bill 2007. I don't know if we have one in here. But so the way that bills work is there's a specific line item, and that's the one we're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Representative McNorton. McDonald, sorry.
Happens, it's okay. I'm just trying to find where on these documents that 41,738 was mentioned.
Okay.
I see you have
So
this.
we're looking at figure 4 on page 2 for School for the Blind. And that actually leads into my next comment, which is, I don't have one up here. If you look at the governor's changes for School for the Blind, I don't have one up here, sorry. So if you look at that yellow sheet, you're going to see in 2025 that she did give that. So in her proposal, she did go ahead and give them back that money and then would put in the language for the reappropriations. Chair, I can stand for more questions on 25, or I can move on to 26.
Seeing none, I think you can move on. Thank you.
We're going to flip ahead to page 4. Here we see the agency's request for fiscal year 26. The second box shows that the agency is requesting $14.8 million in 26, including $8.3 million state general fund. That state general fund amount requested for 26 is below both the approved amount for 2025 and the agency's revised request for 25, so it's slightly lower. Moving on down to figure 7, you can see that while their state general fund remains relatively unchanged, they do have 4 enhancement requests for capital improvement projects to be paid for with the state institution building fund. Item 1 is similar to DEF in that they're asking for an increase to their kind of base rehab and repair budget. Think of it as to account for inflationary changes, trying to cover that. Item 2, again, you heard John Martello talk, really working to abate the hazardous material found on campus. Item 3, agency is requesting funds to replace a gas line. Item 4, the agency, so item 4 is the newer item. The agency is looking to renovate part of the Johnson building that houses the new early childhood program. So you might recall last session, in the final budget, they were given $300,000, I think, to start up a new inclusive early childhood program that would provide daycare services for both the visually impaired and for typical sightseeing children. So they got that startup cost. Now this money is from State Institution Building Fund. They're looking to renovate part of their building to better accommodate those. I'm sure John Harding can definitely give some updates on that. Lastly, in the table, items 5 through 8 are showing other adjustments within the school budget that are occurring absent the enhancement requests. These changes result in a net decrease of $1.1 million in expenditures compared to the amount approved for 25. Really what you're seeing here is kind of a continuation of what I described in the previous year. So in the previous year, they received state general funding and enhancements at the end of session, which then allowed them to reduce the amount of special revenue funds that are required. That was in 2025, and that idea continues into 2026. So, for example, salaries and wages, we're seeing an increase that includes the previous session's enhancements and legislative appropriations, and the general increases also for group health insurance that's been described, other budgets maybe, not in this committee, but from the cost indices that come from Division of Budget. And there's a decrease in contractual services, which you can see there. That's because in this case, they have staff that they're working to hire rather than contracting services out for therapy, and so you're seeing a decrease in contractual services here. If you look at the right side of that table, so we're still in figure 7, if you look at the right side, you're gonna see that the LBC did not give any enhancement requests, so that's why those dashes are there. But otherwise, they did concur with the changes they're seeing in the agency's budget for 2026. And again, as we mentioned earlier, if you look at that yellow piece of paper, look at that yellow piece of paper, you can see with the governor's proposal, she did provide funding both for the hazardous materials and the new campus service gas line. So she did not recommend funding for renovating the space for the child daycare or for the increase to their base rehab and repair budget. She did not do those. That's why they're not on the yellow sheet. Lastly, if you want to move forward a little bit more, the rest of this document is mostly just informational. Pages 7 and 8, it's a different way KLRD presents the capital budget. In the numbers, you can see that the LBC concurred with the agency's revised request for 25, but did not recommend the enhancement requests for 26, which is why the 26 LBC numbers go down, or there's dashes. And in this particular format, you're looking at it in 4 main buckets, which means that the request for the rehab and repair enhancement is going to be within item 3 on this particular table, whereas item 4 is going to have the other major projects that we talked about. And then the rest of the document is just reference tables that have been asked for through the special committee on legislative budget, or budget. And with that, I can stand for questions on 26.
Representative Estes.
Sorry, thank you. Just want to clarify the amounts on page 4 and 5, 2, 3, 2 and 3 are the same amounts as what the School for the Deaf requested for the same purpose?
Yeah,
They're definitely different amounts.
Different amount, okay. So is that each entity wants to pay a certain portion and they've worked out the portion and that's why there's a different amount? I want to make sure it's not a duplication.
correct. It's not a duplication. And I trust my documents, those amounts are correct. I would put a caveat maybe on what the representative said earlier. These are not shared the buildings themselves are not shared, right? He's approaching it in a great way of looking at both projects same time, same schools, but the amounts are different.
So are we or are we not talking about the same tunnel?
Different tunnel.
Different tunnel. And I did misspeak, but she kind of got my meaning, looking at them as a group, because and we're going to fix different things at each school, but let's do some of the same stuff at each one. The buildings and grounds, he talked about yesterday, being able to keep his eyes on the same scopes of work at both locations because he helps at both. And being kind of in that world of construction, being able to keep your eyes on the same scope of work is a whole lot easier than doing a roof over here and your gas main over here. So that was kind of where I wanted to navigate, is be unison oriented around that. But yeah, they're not the same school. I misspoke and maybe misled the committee a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And then on the, if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you. On number 5 with salaries and wages, increasing the salary, I know partly they're moving some people from contractual, but is part of that also because of the state's pay raise and matching the local district? Okay, thank you. I'm done, Matt. I'm done, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, and I think this is clear because I know, but School for the Deaf is in Olathe, and the School for the Blind is in Kansas City, Kansas.
Representative Steele.
Mr. Chair, I have a question regarding the Building Fund Committee and so the agencies, these schools went to them saying that this is what we need and whether or not they approved or not. So we had the clarification a bit earlier with the School of the Deaf. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around timeline, if we don't really know what the building fund is doing, how are we going to approach that if all of this is supposed to be to appropriations for appropriations to get to Senate?
I was going to say, we have a representative who's on that, so I'll let him speak to kind of that process. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Amanda, please correct me if I'm wrong. That's part of the juggling of the appropriations process in this year with the accelerated process. The Speaker and the President wanted to be done by February 13 and have all the subcommittees report out. The Joint State Construction Building Committee being one of them. I know there was one year where we had a new chair on the building construction committee, and this committee specifically reported out the School of the Deaf and the School of the Blind before that committee ever saw it. So it was just kind of which came first on these items. I don't know if that adds any clarification or not, but then I did have a question for Amanda along the same lines.
Go ahead. We'll come back to you, unless you have another question.
No, I just am curious how, as a committee, I mean, because in a perfect world, we want to fund everything. In a committee, if it's not recommended versus recommended, will we know as a committee what they are recommending or not? Because if we say, hey, yeah, we can fund this, but they come back and go, oh, no, it's not a priority, then.
I would definitely say it gives us much more footing to be able to say, we're ready to do this or not. So I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to keep asking for, some of those reports that are in existence. But if they approved the 5-year plan but haven't voted on what priorities they wanted to put on this year or 2026, we're helping move that process forward. So I think we get to be a part of that process, and then if they come along and make some other recommendations, appropriations can adjust it and amend it before it is passed out to the floor. So, and it can also be amended on the floor. So there's time to do this, but we're in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Representative Bowsley.
Thank you. And the building construction committee is on call of the chair. So oftentimes when we're in session, we're getting these report outs, we're meeting over lunch. We're meeting at noon to 1 and jamming out as many of these reports as we can. And when we do the 5-year outlooks, that's often in the interim committee, and it's a long day with lots of reports, which would bring me to my question. Item number 4, the renovate pre-K infant area. You said it was relatively new. Was that in their 5-year capital plan? And maybe we can get an answer elsewhere.
I'll confirm and let you know.
Okay, and then just back to the separate campuses issues, same lines, and I don't know if John would be the one to answer that, but I understand from a contractor point of view, dealing with the same contractors, dealing with the same work being done, and I understand from a contractor point of view, you've already got the tools out, you're already working with the same person, and I can only imagine there's savings recognized there, and I don't know if there's a dollar amount that somebody could put on that or not, but it makes logical sense to me. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative McDonald. And I do want to say, we'll do maybe a couple more questions, but I want to give Mr. Superintendent over here ample time to explain the awesome things about his school. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if the person to answer this is in the room or not, but I'd really like to have a little more information on the request to renovate the pre-K area and why it was denied by the governor and the Legislative Budget Committee. There's just not anything about the why here.
Absolutely. Chair, if it's okay, we do have our Division of Budget counterpart who can speak to a little bit more as to why the governor may or may not have included items, if the chair's okay with that.
Excellent. Please introduce yourself, and we'd love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Jeff Arpin. I'm with the Governor's Budget Office. I work for Adam Profit. I'm not really for sure why the pre-K renovation of that building is not. It is in the governor's recommendation, so it's in the repair and rehabilitation. So if you look at my tracking sheet, you'll see that on there. So it is on there. The only thing, just like the school for the blind, school for the deaf, that was not included in there was the inflation for the general repair and rehabilitation. It was consistent along those lines. But as for the reasoning why those inflation factors was not funded, I can't really speak to the governor, but I know she's looking at this as a holistic, altogether, and knowing that there was some discussion about, property taxes and the 1.5 mils that fund the SIBF along with the Education Building Fund and the Corrections Institutions Building Fund. I'm sure it's a part of a larger conversation with that, but.
So are you saying that, sorry, excuse me, sir, are you saying that the 450,000 would actually be more like 950,000 for that number? Because, I mean, that was almost a $500,000 project. If I'm not just using rough figures, I could go get the exact ones that are on that sheet, but our number on this
That is
sheet.
included, correct.
So yeah, so it'd be on top of the first.
It would be, yeah, so that, there should be a $470,000 item on your gold sheet, I believe is how we're doing it. I'm learning this new process too. This is my 27th year, so I'm trying to get used to the new process too, so.
Okay,
So my apologies, committee, I will get those updated and.
that's all right. Yeah, executive decision just as we're going. We're not gonna work this part of the budget. We'll focus on School of Deaf and we'll get some more information and we'll do that tomorrow when we come back. But we said we were gonna do deaf and I think we have enough information on that to work that here in a little bit. But then we can get some clarifying information. So maybe one more question. Did you have one? I saw, or just follow up?
Just have a follow-up. It is frustrating that we're rushing through all of this. I think when you rush, you make mistakes, and these are really, really important and impactful decisions that we make in this committee and in the other budget committees. So this is only my second session, but I just would like to, again, on the record, express my frustration at our process. And it's not your fault, certainly not your fault, but we really need to look at our process here and the unintended consequences of rushing.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, kind of on the opposite side of that. We used to really not get this for a long time, and so we weren't really working on budgets in the opposite direction. So we were then rushed at the back end to make some of those. And this definitely is going to have some ways that we can improve, and we'll take that into consideration, and I'll never shut that down, but I'm going to try and basically work to make this the best that it can be inside the process, work inside the system to make this better, is what I would like this committee to focus on. Thank you. All right, with that, let me find my agenda here. Thank you very much. Too many papers in front of me. Superintendent John Harding, would you come and join us? And Miss Amanda, thank you very much.
Sorry about that. John Harding, Superintendent School for the Blind, Kansas City, Kansas, and we are also an old institution. I hope to provide some context. My head is kind of spinning. I watched the proceedings yesterday, and I just know we're grateful for John Martello. It's been a blessing to have somebody with that much experience, so we work in tandems. He asked me what I need to drive our educational programs, and we are very proud of our school. We hope that the state is proud of it. We are transparent in all that we do, and we're happy to explain or answer any questions that come up, especially on the educational side. I'm a teacher, but I've learned a little bit about buildings and facilities as well. I believe Representative Steele had a question about deafblindness, and I'm happy to try to answer that if the chair is okay to let me deviate just a little bit. I spent 14 years in deafblindness with the Helen Keller National Center, working out of here in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. So the Department of Education does have a sensory disabilities consultant, and they have an employee who answers questions related to deafness, hard of hearing, blindness, low vision, particularly around compliance issues. And they also have something called the Deafblind Fund. I think it's the only state in the country that actually provides funds to school districts working with children who have a dual sensory loss. So you have some order of vision loss in addition to hearing loss, and it's a whole separate disability essentially. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarity to your question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So we've been around 158 years, and we serve over 800 students. I think the School for the Deaf said the same thing. How do we do that? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? We're a small school. I pulled some of the data for our own outreach team. We went hard into outreach in 2017. We had a study at that time, and they said, you really need to meet the kids where they are. You're in Kansas City, Kansas, but all the kids, most of the kids are outstate. So we adjusted, without any additional revenues, adjusted our structure and created outreach teams. We have an outreach team for students 3 to 21, and we have an outreach team for students now birth to 3. And so they don't work from home, I promise you that. They're working out of their home, but they travel a lot. And we have staff, for instance, in Bueller, Lindsborg, Concordia, Hayes, Wamego, Atchison, Hutchinson, Pratt, Mayetta, Arc City, Scranton, La Crosse, Junction City, Franklin, McLouth, Lindsborg, and Wellington. So our staff are really all over the state. And our campus is just a small part now of what we do. But our campus has grown too. One of the challenges is balancing outreach with our home base, our campus, and to keep that vibrant and requires a lot of innovation and some unique programs. So we've grown from 50 students on our campus last year when I was here. And I think Representative Helgerson in the previous committee said, how many students do you serve? Well, we have 69 as of today on our campus, and that continues to grow. There's tremendous needs in public schools. There's teacher shortages and very complex kids. And so they come to us and ask us for help. And so right now, 800 students across the state, and those are direct services. Those are Braille instruction, orientation, and mobility, sometimes known as cane skills. Those are assessments that really nobody else can do. Our teachers are certified teachers. You have to be certified to provide those services as part of an individual education plan. So that's really our bailiwick and what we do. 96% of our budget, our SGF budget, goes to instruction, and the vast majority of that is salaries and benefits. These are highly trained individuals, so proud to have really the best in the region. And so that's where our money goes on the SGF side. And so when we were asked to present 7.5% reductions, the way we would do that really is to say, well, our campus armed security, last year we got money for an SRO during the day, an armed police officer from the Kansas City, Kansas Public Police Department. And we would have to probably eliminate that, and that would be about $200,000 a year. We do also contract in the evening. As some of you know, we have a dormitory, so we do contract because we can't find an SRO from 6 p.m. at night to 7 in the morning. We do contract with police officers from the department to provide security on campus overnight. That's a big deal for us, safety, of course, for students. Our IT consultant for $100,000 would have to go. And then our ESY on the Road program, which has been mentioned, Amanda mentioned that, that's just off our campus. Our summer school program on our campus has become wildly popular, so popular we cannot accommodate any more students. This year, we've had to divide it into 2 sessions in June, a 2-week session, the first 2 weeks, a 2-week session the last 2 weeks, and we still have kids who want to come. So our idea was to take that on the road and set up shop in Hayes, in Hutchinson, in Dodge City. That money only came through in June, and we have to plan to say, well, we need a kitchen, we need a gym, we need facilities, restroom facilities, things like that. And that one site fell through, which is why we would use it this year if we knew the money was dedicated to make sure we're serving those kids in outstate of Kansas. The other issues, we talked about SB 35 and SIBF. I know that's been hashed around. We don't have taxing or bonding authority, so that's how we pay for our improvements on very old buildings, anything from 1890, the old carriage house. I believe it's the second oldest in Wyandotte County, and to 1990 is our newest building. It was Dick Edlin, former representative or senator, excuse me, I think senator, was named after him. So that's what we use to keep our buildings intact. The other enhancements or rollovers have been mentioned. There's some questions about the preschool. We need to be innovative, and I asked for a little bit of money just for one-time startup money. My gamble is we can make that go and be self-sufficient after 1 year. Everybody tells me there's a need for daycares. We believe there is. But if you've ever gone through that process, you know it's pretty laborious to get licensing. It took us until December to get licensed by the county and KDHE. So we're serving children 6 months to 6 years. We have 13 children already. Most of them are blind, but now we're advertising for typical children, so families who work in the area and are willing to pay a little bit for daycare. Our friends at, for instance, Bishop Ward or Donnelly College, KCC is coming back downtown. We know there's going to be a need there, and we want to be there for them and be there for our community. So we fixed up just one half of our, what is formerly was our elementary school building. We had to put in smaller toilets, sinks, and fix up just the carpet and some of the lights, move things around to accommodate the requirements for licensing. And we know we're going to need that second part of that building, so that's what that money would be for. hazardous materials, gas lines. At the school for the blind, the gas line runs under what we call the breezeway between two buildings. We connected them a long time ago, but the gas line was underneath that. It was the only way to connect two buildings. And so obviously we would appreciate having that moved. Hazardous materials, we are getting a new gym, but under that gym is mercury. So to abate that is, of course, very expensive. We have some buildings with lead paint, things like that. So that's how we would use those monies. There's some inflation money, 5% increase in inflation. It doesn't get any cheaper to put it off to the next year. It's always more expensive to do that. And then, again, our ESY on the road for $41,738. I've explained that already, just finding a site in western Kansas to serve more kids. So we understand you have difficult decisions here. I've listened to the conversation. It's certainly I don't envy you. We understand the need for fiscal responsibility. These are the ways that we would meet that 7.5% reduction. We just appreciate your careful consideration. I would invite you to come to our school. We're just very proud of the kids that we serve, the staff that we have, and I think it's something the state and the State Board of Ed can be proud of. So I'm here to stand for questions.
Well, thank you for your hard work and all of your information that you've given us. I've got a couple, and I would love for us to be able to go on a committee field trip, but COMA kind of doesn't allow for us to all the way do that, but I want to come, and I would love to be by up there hearing this, whether it's in the off session or sometime during session, be able to stop by. So I appreciate the invite.
If I could, just a couple other things too. I think Representative Helgerson asked the question, what other monies do you get? We do have some money for out-of-state students. The state board sets that at $40,000 a year for day students. If they stay in our dorm, it's an additional 20. So I think we're serving like 7 students from Missouri this year, which is a little bit more than we have in the past. We have been allowed to charge 20% of total cost for the non-standard program. So if we're going to do an assessment in a public school or provide an IEP service, we charge 20% of what the school district would typically pay for a private consultant. So it's way cheaper than they would get from, and it doesn't really cover salaries or benefits. That just mitigates some of our costs for sending people on the road to do that. But I'm most proud of our community partnerships. We've got award-winning programs and partnerships with some amazing groups like Make 48, Microsoft Teals. We've won awards. One of our teachers won an Unsung Hero Award from Voya Financial. I think it was $20,000 she won from Voya. We have an amazing makerspace program. We have blind sports, the only blind soccer pitch in the Midwest. Some of the other things that we've done, mobile sports has been wildly popular. We go on the road and we take these to public schools, not for blind kids, but for general kids to teach them about blindness and what it would be like to participate if you're blind. Mobile STEM, same thing. We have a wonderful makerspace. We have a Braille bean coffee business. Our kids with life skills make coffee, so we would encourage you to order some coffee. But really proud of being innovative and creative and efficient with what we do. We're just proud to do it, and yeah, I would love to share more. We can talk forever. Apologies.
It's all right. I saw one question come in, and just let me know. I got you next, but we'll go to Representative Estes first.
I have a list, so please feel free to rotate me in. What certainty do you have that if you got back the 41, almost 42,000, that you have a place ready to go? And can you also please explain to me why the money did not come through until June?
I think it's just appropriated in June. When we asked for it, the money comes through at the beginning of the fiscal year. And so we had just, we do our summer school in June. Once that month passes, we don't do summer school in August or September or October. It's the one time we have to spend it. The site fell through simply because we didn't have a place to do it. The place we thought we were going to use was not available, and so we had to reroute and repurpose, the program in other places. So,
let me re-ask that. What certainty do you have that you have another location? Have you been looking for another location? Are you sure that you've got it?
Yeah, we wouldn't want to let it lapse again. Obviously, it's something we don't like to do. It's a brand new program, so it was something we really had not done before. We used Fort Hays State previously right? But the other 2 locations, we had never been there. So you have to oftentimes in advance call the superintendent up, right? Call the manager of place. They have to refer it. It takes time to get those locations and to make sure it has a safe facility for us to use. We'd been doing some overnights, so some of those places, Fort Hays State, for instance, had those accommodations. So there's just a million things to nail down, but you know, I would give you the assurance that if we got the money back, it would be used because we know there's a huge need, especially outstate in western Kansas.
Okay, and I'll revisit my timeline question because the fiscal year begins in July. So I would have thought that you would have known from the July to the next June that the money was available.
Yeah, I don't, the timeline, I can't really answer that. I guess my assumption was that we weren't sure that we were going to get the money. And so we were working hard. I was using our outreach staff to secure those contracts and those placements. And when it fell through, we just didn't have time to repurpose that because we have summer school in June. That's the one time we have it. And so when it fell through, we didn't have time to find another location for that month.
Right, thank you.
But to be clear, you got to have it at 2 other locations.
We did.
So
We did,
I mean, there was some success in the model, and that
Yeah.
the other one, which is my hometown, you guys, we couldn't accommodate you, which I leaned over to my vice chair and said, they didn't call me. I could have helped. I probably
Context
couldn't
is-
have, but.
Yeah, I mean, it matters because these are kids typically from public schools who may have less complexity in their lives, so they can stay in public, which we support. But they often don't get Braille instruction at the level, the intensity that they need. They often don't get the cane skills. Social skills are such a big thing. You can have a grade point average of 3.8, but if you don't know you're spilling food on the front of your shirt or don't know how to introduce yourself or get from the van to the front of the building, you're not likely to be employed, and we know that's a problem. We take that seriously, and we have a role in fixing that and providing those opportunities for kids in the summer that they may not get August through May. And so they're responding to it. We want to meet that need and be creative. That's really the purpose of it.
Appreciate your feedback. We're going to go to Representative Johnson, I think was next, and then we'll come over to Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Grew up not too far from the blind school, part of my life. Couple questions on the security. How can we not have nighttime security at that particular facility? I don't understand how we can cut that.
I wouldn't want to do it.
No, we can't.
Right.
This is my statement.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are you paying per hour?
I don't know the hourly rate.
Is it KCK or?
It is KCK PD, and they raised the rates. This is our second year of having that service, and so they were able to give us one daytime SRO who's amazing and has given us so much confidence, right? This is our only armed security trained person. Our kids aren't running anywhere. They're not fighting. We're very vulnerable, of course, right? So I would not want to sacrifice that, but I'm also a teacher, and I don't want to give up our instruction, our take away staff, and that'd be the only other way I could do it is to let staff go.
So you need support on that?
I would appreciate support.
Absolutely. I'm just going to tell you, that particular neighborhood, we've got to be careful. We've got to support these kids. That's a special need in that particular area there. Next question, the child care facility and the reduction on that. Do you know, or are you given a reason that they cut that back?
I believe that the governor did include it in her budget, but the committee, the other committee, I'm sorry, I forget the name, Legislative Budget Joint Committee?
LBC, yeah, Special Legislative Budget Committee.
They didn't approve that. So and we do what we can. I guess I use the analogy, I drove a Chevette for my first car, and I loved it. I was proud of it. I fixed it up, right? But that's kind of what we do at the school with older facilities. I want to maximize those spaces. I want to fill them up. I want to keep them busy. It means a lot when people come up and see vibrancy in our school and having little kids, both sighted and blind. We get criticized a lot for being a segregated facility, and I resent that because I don't think that we are, and I think parents ought to have choices about where their children receive education. And so this is serving the community, and we would do what we can with the 3 rooms that we have. We would continue to serve until they're full, but my expectation is that it's going to grow, and we're going to need more space pretty quickly.
Yeah, with that, because been working on childcare issues and in Kansas City, Kansas, real need, especially in that area, very much. Thank you for what you do for those kids, and I'll be in touch. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Smoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am also incredibly concerned with the idea of cutting the SRO. I've worked with high needs kids, and you're absolutely right, they can't run, hide, and fight. And so we need to be looking at protecting them. And I was just wondering, have you ever applied or looked into the federal grants that are available to help mitigate some of the cost of SROs?
I would be willing to do that, but I'm just not familiar with that. And when we were in front of committee a couple of years ago, we know most of our schools in our areas do have either their own police department. KCK Public Schools has their own police department, I believe, and then Bishop Ward has an SRO, and I believe there's other schools in our area. And we have 10 buildings, a 10-acre campus. We've been there on a hill for a long time. It has always been a concern. We've had our security staff, but they're not trained and armed in that way. And so we knew, I mean, I sleep very lightly at night, but I sleep a little bit better knowing we have mostly around-the-clock coverage now. It's a big deal.
If you would, I don't have all the information, obviously. I'm not in touch with the federal grants that are available. I do know that there are several out there, and if you would look into that to see what we can mitigate some of the burden here. That way we are making sure that we're fully covering the SROs. So look into that and then report back to us what you might find out, because that might help us make sure that we're also fully funding that and the teachers as well.
I appreciate that sentiment, and I'll take the opportunity, if I might, just to say we have a small nonprofit at KC Blind All-Stars that was really defunct when I came in 2013. We got that rolling again, and volunteers from the community joined, and they've given us some money over the years, pretty significant. We cannot replace state dollars, please don't misunderstand me, but we've raised, for instance, the track was totally remilled and layered with rubberized surface last year for $342,000, private dollars, all raised mostly from our 5K run and community donations. So our sensory garden, we had a donor give $106,000 for that. The nonprofit gives $67,000 in scholarships. This is over 5 years. The playground, $51,000. Blind soccer pitch, $27,000, space camp, $15,000, and our new gym, they raised over $200,000 to help get us, I say our kids deserve nice things too, right? So we're very proud of that we're helping ourselves and not always reaching out, kind of the preschool approach, which is I don't want to come back every year, I want to make it go ourselves. So thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Representative Hill is next. Thank you for that question and comment, Ms. Smoy. But I wanted to jump in for a second because I'd like to stay on this one-time daycare investment. What would the capacity of that daycare be?
Each room, we have 4 rooms at opposite ends of the building. It's west and east, essentially. It's the south end of our Johnson building. It's a little bit confusing, but each room can hold 20 students, approximately. There are different rules for babies, of course, and I'm not, to be perfectly honest, I don't know the exact numbers, but, we could probably accommodate up to 35, 40 children, which for us would be a big number when you're talking about blindness or low vision. The staffing needs are a little bit more aggressive. You need to have qualified people working with those children. But I think we could, my goal was 25 by the end of June. I'm over halfway there. So, and we only got licensed really in December, so.
Thank you for that answer. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Superintendent Harding. I have been at your school, and I was amazingly impressed.
Thank you.
And by the way, I'd like to run in your
Please do.
5K if I could trudge my fat old body that long.
I labor through it every year, and it's never easy. It doesn't get any easier. I know. But we would love to have you.
Okay, I have a couple clarification questions. When you were talking about the daycare facility, are you currently serving all of the blind daycare children that are in the area?
No, not all of them. You know, we see ourselves as an extension of public schools and preschools and infant toddler networks. That's really the starting point for all children with disabilities by federal law. And I say I'm an inclusionist. So many times children are served in other settings, and we are asked to go to those other settings. I also mentioned choice, and I am a believer in parent information. Our job is to give parents information and to let them do what they think is best, accurate, trusted information. Sometimes parents say, I really want to come to the school for the blind. I like the services up there. I like the attention to detail. I like the qualified staff. And so we've run a preschool for several years, a small preschool. It's kind of an enrichment program where parents just decide on their own, I'm going to drive up 3 days a week and get preschool enrichment. So we've carried that over. What we want to do is add that piece for daycare. Our own staff have babies. They don't want to drive 25 extra miles. We discount it for our employees. But I've always believed that if you have a need, if the need is there, then they will come. And so we believe we can grow that program and make it self-sufficient.
So let me rephrase that question a little bit. The expansion you want to do is not for blind children, is that correct?
Both. It'd be both, and we don't know what the right proportion would be. We think a third blind and maybe 2/3 who are more typical or sighted would be fine. I mean, we know that we're told that there's a problem with daycare, right, in all areas of the state, and certainly in Wyandotte County, there's a problem. So I would expect the growth will come through the daycare of sighted children. Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yes. I mean, I think most daycares try to operate at a profit. I mean, if you have children that are not blind coming in, I assume that you would be charging them like a normal daycare would. Is that correct?
We did. We did some research on what the market would bear for typical preschool or daycares in Wyandotte County, and I think we're at 85% of the average for typical children. These are babies, siblings of our children who are blind, for instance. They want to bring them together. And the structure is a little bit different. For the preschool side, we're using a curriculum. It's an intentional, and it's a school. For the daycare side, it wouldn't be as rigorous on the academic side, and the hours would be a little bit different. But I know there's a need. The police department wanted us to expand for overnight services. They want to recruit more police officers. Would you consider having a daycare overnight? And I thought, I hadn't even thought about that. We have a dorm that goes 24 hours, 5 days a week, but we're not prepared to do that. But, my point is that I think the growth will come, and we believe we can make it go. We're used to it adapting. We're used to innovating and meeting the needs that emerge. That's how we survive.
So and I'll try to get this wrapped up. I've got one other quick question too, but have you applied, as my understanding that the Governor's Children's Cabinet has funded a lot of daycare throughout the state. Have you attempted to get money through that way for the daycare?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I relied on my teacher director to look into that. A lot of times the funding mechanisms are set up not for state agencies, right? We just don't qualify as other agencies or organizations might. A little more complexity, a lot of times the answer is, well, we're not sure. So it slows the process up a little bit. And so we haven't received any additional monies, but we're certainly open to that.
Okay. And one final question. I need a little clarification on it. I think it's when you're talking about doing assessments in the school districts, and I believe you made the comment that you charge them 20%
of total cost.
I'm trying to figure that out because I don't understand why you would gift 80% of what their normal costs are, and take it away from your budget, take it away from the children you're trying to serve. I'm trying to figure that out.
It's a great question, and I guess my answer would be, before I came, we didn't have an outreach team. All the services were delivered on our campus in Kansas City, Kansas, and so that limited, of course, our reach. And as fewer students would come to our campus because of federal law says students must first be educated in their home schools and home communities, our population on the campus shrank. And so a former superintendent, Bill Doherty, said, let's get an outreach program going. But we didn't want to essentially double charge, right? I mean, the sense is school districts have tight budgets too, and services at our campus had been free, and they still are, right? The only thing that school districts pay when they send a child to our school is transportation, which is 80% reimbursed. And they will sometimes pay for a one-to-one for a child who has significant complexities and needs that kind of support. So at some point before my arrival, the legislature said, well, we'll let you recoup some of the expenses for your staff to travel to Abilene and Salina and Sabetha and across the state, knowing that it's going to be a little more expensive for you to provide those services. And so those were what we used to call fee funds. That's how we would pay for summer school, and still do. But it doesn't recoup all of our costs for sure, and doesn't pay for salaries or benefits.
What's the total amount that you receive for that fee fund for doing that?
We have a chart that, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. You mean the total amount that we get?
Yes.
I would have to check with our budget office and get back with you. I could do it tomorrow, but I don't know off the top of my head. It varies. It's grown because we have more outreach workers providing more of those services. And so it's grown, but it's still proportional essentially to our expenses, right? Because we have to pay salaries and benefits and travel costs the more outreach workers we have, even though they've got a little bit of revenue coming in. But we try to look to the legislature and the state board to set our fees. The state board says it's $40,000 for an out-of-state student. We'd be open to changing that. I don't know what the right number is. We always try to be accessible. Our number one thing is we don't want somebody to say it's too expensive. Looks like I've got some help here. My glasses on. Okay. So for FY fiscal year 2025, $230,000 in those what we would call fee funds, or expenses that districts are paying for our services outside of the typical campus experience.
But that's not wholly, I mean, that's not just for the assessments, that's also including the out-of-state students that are there and okay.
Yeah, our assessments are charged, and when we do what we call a direct service, so if a school says, I've got a child who's blind who needs Braille instruction 45 minutes a week, and I don't have a teacher to do that, that's legally required. So they will call us, and we would say, okay, we'll do our very, very best to either provide that service with one of our staff, or if we can't do it, we'll say that we know a consultant. My real dream would be we could do it all, because I believe we use data best, and we support our staff, and we know how to provide those services for all children, but I don't have the capacity right now to do that. So we do the best we can with the staff that we have.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good questions. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the effort you have gone to work on funding on your own end of this. I have a question, and it may kind of piggyback with Representative Hill. On the preschool, daycare, there's grants and such out there, especially right now with preschools. It seems to be a really hot initiative. Have you looked into any of that to expand and maybe get some funding there?
I think that question might have been asked a different way earlier, and we've looked at it, but as a state agency, we're not the typical organization that they have in mind when they establish these grants. They're often for K-12 schools, for instance, or churches or other organizations. When a state agency, sometimes we just don't fit into those granting requirements. And really my push was to get it going. Let's get it started and let's start serving kids. And then once you get a base, it will grow. But I'm certainly not opposed to receiving other types of funding. And if there are some that I'm not aware of or you think that we would qualify for, I'd love to hear that.
Thank you.
Representative Steele, no, Estes was next.
Thank you, and I'm glad we're staying on the same topic. I want to make sure that I'm hearing your answer because several of us have asked. Are you saying you have applied and were denied because you didn't fit in a typical bucket?
I didn't personally, Representative, I didn't personally apply.
Your organization.
My understanding is that my director explored funding opportunities and came back to me and said, well, we don't qualify for this, or this one doesn't match what we do. And so therefore, I respected, her information and said, we're just going to go with what we have. But again, I'm open to applying and seeking out other sources of funding. We want to be creative and receptive to that.
Absolutely. What I would appreciate is hearing follow-up on which programs you didn't fall into and why, because maybe we could do our part and tweak language. So that's why we're asking these questions. Sure. We're trying to help you out. So on that line, I verified to my phone a friend, Dr. Nguyen, that preschoolers in Kansas do qualify for, an IEP. For your children who are struggling with sight in your preschool, have you ever kind of assigned, gee, if this child had an IEP, this is what the state would be doing? Because I think that would help your numerical argument.
Yeah. I'm hoping I'm understanding you. Was that a question or a statement?
It's a question. Have you ever said, because you're obviously not just babysitting a child all day. You guys do wonderful things. And if that child who is not sighted or has limited sight was on an IEP and you were getting special ed funding for that child, it could be argued that your preschool is saving the state money because that child is not on an IEP. So have you ever assigned kind of a rough value to what you were helping to save the state by your preschool?
I haven't done that calculation, and you're correct in saying that the preschool children are on IEPs, and they're typically served in their preschool at their public school. And we offer that service. We have a student or two who is on an IEP where the school says, we need help. We need help. That child needs to be at this location for your services. So we have a couple that do send students to us through an IEP, just as they do for all of our other students. And there's really no expense to the school district for doing that. I firmly believe that there are a lot of students in that area who we could be serving on IEPs, but it is incumbent upon the IEP team to make that decision. We can't unilaterally say, send your children to us. All we can do is say we're available when and if you need us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If a school is sending a child to you as part of their IEP, you should be getting money for that, and we'd like some follow-up on whether or not that is happening.
Services for all of our students, every student at School for the Blind is on an IEP, and we have never, received monies for that, categorical aid or other monies for that. That's been the reason why we are funded to provide services to Kansas students who are blind. So when they send those students, they're responsible for transportation, the district, not the parent. And the only other expense is if they need a one-to-one for students who are very complex. They will often either provide that person, more typically now, they reimburse us because they can't find a person to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amanda, I'd like to know, and this may be a tough thing to find out, but if a school district is getting money for a child to be sent, I'd like that money to follow the child. Or do we just say, oh, we know this child is going to a free program on our IEP and we're not paying that school, the home school, or the school of origin for that IEP service? I'd like to know how that works. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question, and we're going to stop, and then I have an announcement. Representative Steele.
Representative, thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Estes, thank you for bringing that up because that information would be crucial. Okay, can you tell me, I see in the document on page 10 that in the fiscal year 2024, you received $1 million from KDHE for a FIT program. You've used all of that? So, and then you also got the 300 renovations for this child care program last year?
So it's separate issues, Chair, if I may. The FIT program is family, infant, toddler. So we had never had an outreach team dedicated to serving babies. We know that children who are blind need interventions early in their homes. And all those children in infant toddler programs across the state, I believe there's 26 to 29, they were not typically served by vision teachers, people with training and expertise in informing parents what to expect, where to get an eye exam, referrals, information, practices, assessments. So we asked the governor's office a couple of years ago to say, we'd love to serve those babies. We'd like to go into homes and support parents, but we need help to do that. And the governor said, that's a great idea, but there's already an agency serving babies, right, KDHE. So she said, work with them. You know, we can allocate the monies, but you have the expertise. So the money goes to the Department of Health and Environment, and it flows through to us, and we hire the teachers. We have 8 teachers and 1 acting director who also serves babies, and we serve 200, I believe we're at 215 kids in just about a year and 4 months, I think, is how long it's been in existence. So that's a lot of babies that are getting services now in homes, and the parents didn't have information before. So, you know, it provides an anchor for them over the course of their schooling.
Thank you for that explanation, and thank you for your service to those students. It's truly appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The second question I didn't get a chance to get to, you were talking about, can you ask your second part of the question again?
The $300K that you were allocated for the child care last year, so the 470 that you're asking for this year, would this finish the project?
The $300,000 we asked for was really to hire instructional assistants or paraprofessionals. We had a teacher who was a director who we were already paying. We appointed her as the director, so that didn't cost us anything. The monies are to hire staff, and my calculation was I have to pay them at least $20 an hour to get them to stay, right? Or they're going to go to Amazon or some other place in Kansas City. And so that's how we're using those dollars, is to pay instructional assistants in the program, you know, salaries and benefits. Yeah.
All right, committee, thank you very much for robust discussion around our incredible School of the Blind. Thank you for your service. There are some things that I have to clarify for us on voting on the School of the Deaf. And so we are going to try and organize a translator when we're voting on that. They like to be listening. I probably would too if I was them. And so we are going to try and get one for tomorrow. If we can, we will work their budget, but it's part of our courtesy to them and part of our responsibility that they be able to hear that. And so if they can't get a translator, that one's not until the 29th, so we still have some time. So we'll kind of stick on schedule and do deaf and blind tomorrow, both schools' budgets vote out tomorrow. And then we'll give the remainder of the time to some overview of KSDE budget and them giving answering some questions that we sent them, getting your budgets in your hand for going over the larger but kind of very similar breakout where we'll go through a similar process all next week to look at the K-12 budget, the KSD department report. So their recommendations, the governor's recommendations, all of it. So I appreciate the comments, the feedback. I think we learned some things. know sometimes you just get to come over here once a year, but I think there's interest in what you're doing with this committee and how we can not just partner once a year with you. So I will just end by just having that door stay open for the rest of this session that I think we're going to have after budgets get out. I think we're going to have some time to where if you have some space to come back and maybe address some of these other things to where we can aid each other. And the more we know, the more we can help. And I think we learned a lot today. So I appreciate your time.
So grateful, really, for the opportunity. It's hard to explain what we do in 15 minutes or committee. We do an annual report every year. I'll leave just a copy up here. So we try to, no one's ever asked me for it from Legislature, but we do it every year. And it's a chance for me to brag about what we do. We're not perfect. You know, we're always looking to improve. We're open to suggestions and ways to get better and partnerships. So if you have places that we can borrow or rent in the summer, we'd love to hear it. But I thank you for your time and your leadership.
Thank you, sir. And with that, we are adjourned.